Our history has shaped us more than what we think it has. And we've had plantation capitalism for almost 300 years. We imposed it on the Indians because we took the land from them and reduced them to poverty. We refused to recognize the right of women for equality. We hung people who were called witches. We established slavery of African people for 250 years. Then we continued the economic oppression of that system with Jim Crow law. We're saying that certain kinds of people could not do certain kinds of work. So we joined the women with the boycott of ourselves in what kind of work we do. You couldn't be school teachers, you couldn't be police officers, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that. So the lack of access. So all of that I consider plantation capitalism. Plantation capitalism's major error is sees all kinds of people who are not human beings. I see it especially today in the effort to reduce workers' benefits and pay, and in particular with the large millions of people who work, sometimes two adults in the same household working, and still have to struggle to be sure they're going to have food next week, and cannot give the kind of attention they want to give to their children because they must work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. I use an ancient term coming out of colonial period of religion. Corruption meant that you say one thing and you refuse then to try to work on it and make it happen. So you do not practice what you preach. And the Democratic Party pretends to be for the welfare of the American people, but again and again comes down on the side of fracking, on the side of hedge funds and Bank of America, comes down all the time on using our military bases abroad for the purpose of subduing other people and dominating them. It comes down again and again on the side of global economics, which means that the flow of wealth and minerals from Africa, Latin America, Asia will continue to come towards Berlin and Washington. Escalating the violence in the Middle East is yet another way of controlling international events so that the peoples of the earth cannot be about their own business, which is the business of work, family, caring for our children, nurturing one another, and recognizing the common creation. That's 1,400 according to the press versus 100,000 who's already dead and been killed. The 1,400 is bad enough. The 100,000 is much worse. There's very little difference between death from chemical weapons and death from drones. We can change our country by, I think, organizing the poor into unions by the millions so that they can collectively bargain and challenge plantation capitalism. The task is not so much opposing the military bases as it is transforming the way in which we think about ourselves. Plantation capitalism. Racism says because of color, certain people do not matter. They are dispensable. They are not equal. And the institutions of society should see to it that they are not equal. Sexism says the same thing about women. Violence says the same thing about the people that we want to kill. Some people only understand violence. They cannot be treated as normal human beings. So you must have the bombs and the guns organized against them. Plantation capitalism says basically a human being is not a human being. because some human beings must, by their own character, become workers who do the work that we profit from. They do not gain from their work. They do not gain from their work. They do not benefit from their work. And that's the way it is. So one of the major areas where this has happened in the United States in the last 25 years is in the banking industry. The banking industry used to have a lot of women who were bank tellers, and their pay was steadily increasing. But about 25, 30 years ago, the banks decided, as they merged and bought up other banks and became larger and larger, they decided that these women tellers should not be employees, but should be independent contractors, and their wages should not go up, and their benefits, they have to care for their own benefits. So that now wages for women in banks who are tellers all across the country averages somewhere between $7 and $10 an hour.
But they're getting rid of them now.
Beg pardon?
They're getting rid of tellers now. It's automated.
Beg pardon?
It's everything is getting automated.
Yes.
They don't even want you to go to the bank.
Exactly. And I maintain the scientific, technological push of artificial intelligence is primarily in order to make more people dispensable and expendable, and to again create an economic system that allows for the emergence of the rich and the elite. I maintain that artificial intelligence is not being pushed that hard for the benefit of making it easier to be human, but it's primarily about exactly what you're talking about. The way they've pushed wages down, automation and making of robots.
Well, it's also with utilities. I work for the gas company, and they were trying to close all the payment offices down because, someone was in there, you take your money and you pay your bill. Now they want you to do it online. I go, I'm not going to do it online. I'm going to go. I don't pay cash, but I give them a check. But I go into the office so that they won't close that payment office. And it's the same thing with Edison. They don't want you to pay your bill. In the office, they want you to pay it online.
Lawson, what do you think happened then with the Nissan? Because those were primarily African Americans that they were trying to unionize. What do you think happened in that, which just recently happened, where they weren't able to do so? Do you think it was too much intimidation?
I have not paid attention to it.
Oh, okay.
Just in Tennessee?
Yeah.
Tennessee's a right to work state, so we can do that.
Yeah, but they had been organizing, so I just was curious if you knew about it, because they had been organizing for 2 years down there, and they still lost the ability to unionize. And since you brought forward the impact, one of your answers was to unionize. I was just wondering if you were familiar with that.
But that oxymoron, right?
Well, exactly, that's what I was gonna just comment on it. And that's been it seems like a recent concept, but they've been working up to that idea for a long time. It's all part of it.
So do you think as part of the nonviolent work that we're doing, it's also that education component of what the unions are, why they're important, and what the benefit is as well?
You don't mind repeating that again?
If we're in our neighborhoods, as part of this nonviolence, as we're looking at, I know you've always taught us that actually the community has to decide that, but do you also see, as part of us building in our own neighborhoods, education about what unions are, why they're needed as part of a nonviolent education?
I think I think in the United States we have, well, let me start over. A democratic experiment requires sizable numbers, I believe, of people who are conscientiously engaged in their lives and in their families and in the places where they live, so that they are concerned not just for themselves, but they're concerned for their families, which most of us are. I mean, I think one agenda of the human race that is not the agenda of the power brokers, of decision makers in the United States and many other places, is that we do think the well-being of ourselves and our children, our future, our families, that's our major agenda. Our major agenda is not creating a share of control and management of the water of the earth, as an example. That's really a relatively small group of people in the world who want a, quote, market share of the oil or a market share of the retail industry. We did not get to where we are as a human race because we've had that principle as a major principle operating in the human family. That's a relatively new God. The market share, a presentable, visible share, quantitative share of the market in men's suits or automobiles and so forth and so on. Where that leads, no one knows by any means. But most human beings, as any number of philosophers have said, including Gandhi, most human beings have the agenda about their own welfare, the welfare of their family, their babies, their children, the welfare of where they live, and their work. So that includes the whole business of work and the rest of it. So democracy has to have people who are alert to that, who are self-conscious of that, aware of that. So that's why I sense that we need strong, vigorous congregations of religious people who have the religious purpose and mission in mind, becoming a whole person, achieving some level of love and compassion and truth. Or, in other words, as the scriptures say, love the neighbor, love God with heart, soul, mind, strength. Neighbor as yourself. So we have to have institutions like that, and that is certainly the Jewish Christian task and purpose. But along with that, we have to have then local wise political agencies. And economically, I'm not one who says that we can have it. I'm one who says that we cannot have a thorough democracy if people are not engaged in helping to establish their own economic justice and equity. And that's what a labor union is about. And big business in the United States, through the Chamber of Commerce, is determined that unionism ends. And they have benefited from both the Republican and the Democratic Party with measures that make it hard, very, very hard, for a local group of people like the sanitation strike in Memphis to decide we can only proceed in this work and allow the work to bless us if we have an organized, if we ourselves are organized as a union and we fight together the battle of wages, benefits, the climate of the workspace, the safety of the workspace, the safety of the job itself. If we can help shape all of that with the city of Memphis, then we have a chance of really influencing our own well-being and the well-being of others and the well-being of the city. Now that's precisely what happened with the sanitation strike in Memphis, where I was chairman of the strategy committee in 1968. We have to have working people seeking their own justice, not it being given to them by anybody else, but by their working to make it happen. Now, one of the advances in the 20th century was the advance of wages for all kinds of people, and that was done by the work of some thousands and thousands of strikes from 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. Thousands of strikes every year in almost every kind of corporation and industry. And these were all run largely by local working people and their families. The wives and husbands were also a part of the picture. And that's what produced Social Security. That was a major factor in producing Social Security. Minimum wage, the rights of working space to be safe and secure. So all of that has been under attack for the last 30 years by the Chamber of Commerce and big business. And that's why now the inequality and the injury rates and the death rates of working people in various kinds of jobs continue to climb. Because of economically, that struggle put 50 million people in all kinds of local unions. That's now been reduced to less than about 13 million. And the fight against American people by both parties operating it, but the Republican Party is far worse than the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party owns its losses primarily to its failure to continue the work that a Robert Kennedy or that an Eleanor Roosevelt tried to put in place. So, and that's a part of my own analysis of where we are. But both parties have. Here's where we are today. No working person in the United States, whether it's in a bank or a university, has the right to contest their employment. They can be terminated without cause in almost every area of economic life in the United States. They have no right of grievance. There are no agencies that really protect workers from injury and disaster. So I know very well that this is not something that can be done well without working people themselves doing it in an organized fashion, and with organizations that they themselves govern.
Just a comment on that. I actually work for a union, and I feel like one of its failures is that it's no longer rooted in nonviolence. The union, some of the union movement itself, unfortunately, is. I mean, it's rooted in campaigning, organizing, but not from a deep nonviolent
congregations tend to reflect the culture of the society, and they do not do the work of assessment of themselves, do not do the work of who their members are and what those members are about. That needs to be done in order to help the union recover or gain certain principles. Some unionism has been sort of capitalistic unionizing.
Exactly. And it's very, very
And you still have that, yeah, exactly, out of their culture. The police unions, for an example, are like that. They're very much business, what's called in the language of labor and all, called business unions. They are not interested in capitalizing on the assets of their membership. Example. In the Los Angeles area, many police officers are college graduates with graduate degrees. Many women police officers became police officers in Los Angeles because the pay of a beginning police officer was more than the pay of a beginning social worker, a teacher, a nurse, and a whole lot of other stuff. So in actual fact in LA, women with master's degrees became police officers. Police officers themselves probably have more intellectual and experiential background for helping to shape policing today than any other group of people in the country. Police unions, by and large, do not capitalize on that experiential background. So city after city where there are issues of police, you don't know how the officers in that community feel about their job. I mean, for an example, do you know that 85% of police officers, this was a figure one time, a few years ago by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, 85% of police officers never touched their guns in a lifetime of policing in the United States. 85% of police officers never touched their guns in a life career of policing in the United States. The largest numbers of 911 calls that go to police have nothing to do with a crime being committed or with a dangerous situation. Policing today is not the number one hazard work in the country. Has not been probably for 30 years. Being a fireman is more hazardous, more injuries, more deaths. Being an electrical worker is more hazardous. I haven't looked at this recently, so I don't remember the different vocations that are head of policing. But policing is not the most hazardous work now in the United States. This is part of what the whole controversy in some places with Jeff Sessions and Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of the country, would have over the question of community policing. That's a huge issue. Versus, old line policing, the Wyatt Earp policing forms of an earlier time of the 19th century. So what I'm saying here is that in scene after scene, working families, when challenged in their own organizations, become an articulate force for the benefit of the community. So the right today, for example, in the Los Angeles area, Local 11, which has been one of the fastest growing, it's the Hotel Restaurant Employees Union, one of the fastest growing unions in the Los Angeles area, they now call themselves a social justice union because they maintain that as a union, local union organized and growing and working, they have to be concerned for all of the issues which touch upon their members and their families. That they are not a business union. So their major work is not the redress of the grievances of individual members, though they do that work. That they are a union that must be deeply rooted in the grassroots, in the people who they have organized, and the development of those people in assuming all sorts of responsibility for themselves, for the union. So that's a kind of comparison. But the point I was making is that for a democratic experiment like ours, we must have an engaged people. We don't have to have 100% engaged people, but we have to have a sizable percentage. And the illiteracy of our country, especially in the white communities that produce the Jeff Sessions and the Donald Trumps. I mean, that something has to happen about that, and so I would be at fault if in our understanding of nonviolence we did not recognize that fact. Many people have been changing in this country. Millions of people have decided that people do not need to be poor, that they have not made bad decisions, but which makes them poor. I've watched this, but it's the group of those who continue to want a savior like a Donald Trump that endanger the country's future. And I'll document that in another way. In the 3 presidential elections in the 21st century, the victor has always been seen by the voting people as a non-establishmentarian person. George W. Bush was not an establishmentarian person, even though he came out of the establishment, born on the home plate, and thinking that he was birthed there and that's where he got on his own, rather than from a very wealthy and well-established political and wealth family and heritage. Barack Obama and Donald Trump, all 3 are non-establishmentarian. The second thing about those 3 elections is that a majority, let me see how I put this so I'm accurate. In the case of George Bush, he won the electoral vote, he lost the popular vote. In the case of Obama, he won both the popular vote, majority of people voted for him twice, and an electoral vote. Trump, in the case of the third person, Trump, he lost the popular vote and won the electoral vote. A majority of people in the Trump election, majority of the USA people voted against Trump in the presidency and against the Republican Party in both the House and the Senate, even though the Republican Party won both the House and the Senate in 2016. What I see in that is that the American people, by and large, want to be able to vote for a presidency and a party that will do the work of reversing the inequity that is being established in the last 30 or 40 years. They thought they were doing it in all three elections. So what's going to happen with the fourth president or the next presidential election? So the political structures and power brokers do not reflect where the USA people are. And there is a difference between, however, the politics of direct nonviolent action and the politics of the electoral campaigns. There's a difference between the two politics. Go ahead.
When I was growing up in school, they often talked about our electoral process as a kind of nonviolent revolution. We got to have one every 4 years. When we've gone through 3 cycles of elections where the vote says one thing and the results say another, when you look at history, this kind of thing can only go on so long before there is some kind of revolution. So, and since our, quote, nonviolent revolution of the ballot box doesn't seem to be working, is there another kind of nonviolent revolution?
Yeah, a good point, another good point. There is another form of revolution. And revolution may not be the best word because in a variety of ways in the United States, revolution has the socialist Marxist meaning of violence. And it's still very prevalent because in these demonstrations and counter demonstrations, you have a whole range of young adults mostly who are of the mind that revolution means violence, and their violence is a part of the prelude to the revolution that has to come. The Black Bloc group, for an example, on our West Coast and East Coast, West Coast, which I know better than the East Coast, is such a group. So it may be we need to change the meaning of revolution very clearly in our thinking and talking and preparation. But the neoconservative struggle right now is a direct result of the nonviolent campaigns from 1953 to 1973. The neoconservative business in the United States is a direct result of the nonviolent direct action campaigns that came out of the Rosa Parks and Martin King wing of nonviolent struggle and nonviolent direct campaigns. That's not understood. Jeff Sessions is one of the products of that resistance. He is becoming, for me, a part of the symbol. I knew him before he became a senator. I knew of him and of his work in Alabama. And for me now, he's become a symbol of that residual neoconservative effort. That is a combination of states' rights, racism, the primacy of a cultural element, civilization, white civilization, and the rest of it. So it's no accident, therefore, that Jeff Sessions became a Republican as this movement was going on and as Alabama was changing, and any variety of local black organizations that were pushing for equity, full citizenship, the right to vote, and if you can say it, the Black Freedom Movement in Alabama, voting for black people to become elected officers of the society. All of that has been a part of the transformation that's taken place. So Jeff Sessions is a reaction to that and a resistance to that. The neoconservative movement is precisely that. I was about to say Bill Buckley, but William Buckley was one of the founders of the neoconservative movement. He's now deceased, but he had a very influential television show. He wrote 2 or 3 books. He was a Catholic Christian. And it's William Buckley who said in the 60s, as that struggle was emerging, that is, as the King movement was emerging, nonviolent direct action, William Buckley is the one who said to the conservative movement, that's what he called himself at the time, a conservative. He's a northern-born Catholic and wealthy family person. William Buckley said that in the struggle between the civil rights people and white civilization, we must stand on the side of white civilization. That's not the exact phrasing he used, but it was almost like that. White civilization versus what others have called the Black Freedom Movement in the 50s and 60s. So he represents the rearranging of the conservatism in the United States so that it's an Alabama Republican Party that now dictates, by and large, politics in Alabama. Because it was the Democratic Party in the nation where you had Democratic presidents who started listening to what was going on in the United States with the people, including what was happening to black people and Indian people, and decided that they could use the office and the presidency and the Congress to begin to move to help change it. That was, so John Kennedy was one of those people. John Kennedy did not run on a civil rights, with any awareness of the civil rights issue. He was elected in '59, began his administration in 1960. Well, what happened in 1960? Now, it says something about him that he, even with the emergence of King as a major spokesperson for justice around the world, for dismantling the wrong, John Kennedy seemed to be not aware of it. So his campaign platform did not include any kind of statement about segregation and racism or civil rights and whatnot and whatnot. And he seemed not to be aware of the fact, he knew the name King, but he seemed to be unaware of the fact that a major sort of thing was going on already. Montgomery bus boycott 55 to 57, during his years as a senator. But 1960 is the year of the second major campaign. That's called the sit-in campaign. Sit-in campaign. As I organized the sit-ins in Nashville, I organized a sit-in in Nashville, and I did organize it for the purpose of showing people, including myself, that the Montgomery bus boycott was not an accident. that we were dealing with a theory and a methodology that could be planned and organized from the grassroots and be effective to do it. So I'm a little bit upset with myself that I did not bring the Nashville Story 30-minute video, because it is a video that's become a training video in any number of languages now, produced by Peter Ackerman and Jack Duvall of the International Center for Nonviolent Conflict. Excuse me, and they've gotten it translated into about 20 different languages. It's in Arabic, for an example, and being used by scholars and academics and by activists. And the film doesn't by any means adequately tell the story, nor am I satisfied personally with it as a training film, but it's a video that does describe a highly effective campaign that was necessary for the movement to emerge, to continue to emerge. If you've noticed me talking, I have not used very often the term training, because I prefer the term preparation. And I prefer that, like an athlete, and or like our war academies, West Point, we have to have some people who get engaged in nonviolent theory, history, methodologies, campaigns, so that they can be people who help campaigns develop a competent nonviolent style and philosophy and effectiveness. Does that make sense? I think struggle requires leadership. Leadership comes because leadership prepares itself and works hard at it and gets engaged with the struggle somewhere, and then has some background and knowledge of things like campaigns of the past, strategies of the past, methodologies of the past they can use. Yes.
Just a question. I was there Saturday and
Yeah.
learned a lot from the film. And going up in the South, lived through a lot of the issues that were in the film. There were readily available pain points.
And regularly available what?
Readily available and obvious pain points.
PAIN?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Hence what you did with the sit-ins, what Dr. King and his group of ladies did to begin the boycott in Montgomery. They were so obvious, and then you were able to put together your first group of 15 or 20 people, as you mentioned in the film, in 3 to 4 months of deciding what and how you're going to act. What are our obvious pain points today? We have such a fractured group of people fighting so many different battles. Do we have any real specific pain points in your opinion?
Look, in place after place, in city, suburban, urban, rural areas, there are a multitude of pain points across the board. But from a nonviolent perspective, so from a way of how you get moving perspective, I suggest the following: that and I use the 4 steps I used on the Nashville scene. They were Gandhian steps as shaped by a number of conversations in the United States and as shaped by me, by some people in the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Jim Farmer in 1942, which I learned after my work in 58, 59, had in 1942 proposed four-step process. Gandhi's work produced methodology, most of which he borrowed from his reading and from campaigns that took place elsewhere in the world as well. How to find the pain point to begin has to be done at a local level, where a number of people come together who have mutual concern for what they see to be the plight in their community and are willing to spend the time together to work systematically to begin to penetrate that pain and that plight and to work against it, to change it. So that's how some of us were able to reduce the Gandhian methodology to a four-step way of going after a struggle locally. Give you an illustration from Gandhi. When Gandhi returned to India in 1914, he was a hero. And he would not allow himself to become a hero or a savior. That made a lot of people mad. But as he toured India just to see and become acquainted in India, he's not been there since 1893 to 1914. So he wisely, and some of his friends in India said, you should tour the country and see it for yourself again. All right. As he was in that tour, he got a group of farmers who actually, I'll use this term, they were sharecrop farmers. They farmed the land that was a part of the wealthy plantations in their part of the country. And they had many grievances about this farm process that kept them poor. For some of them, it meant they were in debt more after they sold their crops to the plantation owner than they were when they started their crops. And he insisted. And they said, they in a sense, they crowded him and said, you have to come and see our situation. And he told them when he was coming. But then when he got there, he said, the first thing we have to do is we have to hold hearings all across this area and see what you're saying. Hear from everywhere what people are doing. He called for volunteers. He got a whole slew of students who came into that area of the country and held hearings at village after village, city after city. And so out of that, he then tried to help them map a program for change. So he called his first step investigation. It's not enough to realize there are issues here that people are suffering and people are being hurt. There's injustice. You need to be sure that you examine it carefully, because the power structures that cause the problems are probably not aware, are not conscious of what it is that is happening to people because of what they govern, of how they govern, and what they orchestrate. So he put investigation. So instead of the term investigation, I use the term focus. Investigation being one of the elements of focus, because my contention even in the 50s was that all of us are busy people. We are engaged in our own lives and our own families, our own work. We don't have the priority. We don't have the priority to be able to just do anything. And the issues may be such that they require a group of people to be able to come to a consensus around the term We've examined this stuff. We examined this situation here in Nashville. We now decide, and this is a decision was made, we now decide we are going to have a nonviolent campaign in Nashville. And the specific campaign was built around a decision that 6 months of weekly talks produced. That is, we will desegregate downtown Nashville. That was the decision made. And you have it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Isn't that marvelous? That's good. See, this is a good application of technology. Yeah, I didn't bring the film, but we do have it. So.
We need to break in here.